something doesn't add up. In 2012, when NASA announced the Space Launch System, agency officials told Congress it would cost roughly $500 million per launch. By 2021, NASA's own Inspector General testified that the actual cost of each of the first 4 Artemis missions would be $4.1 billion. And in May 2025, the Trump administration's budget proposal called SLS quote, _0 noting it had exceeded its budget by 140%. The rocket is real, it flew, it works, and it costs 8 times what was promised. This is not a story about engineering failure. The engineering succeeded. This is a story about a system that produces expensive rockets because that's what it was built to do. There is a type of government contract called cost plus. The principle is simple. The contractor builds what the government asks for, bills the government for all costs incurred, and receives a fee on top. If costs rise, the government pays more. If costs rise again, the government pays more again. The contractor's profit is guaranteed, regardless of efficiency. The fee might vary slightly based on performance reviews, but the baseline is spend more, bill more, earn more. This is the contract structure under which Boeing built the SLS core stage, and Northrop Grumman built the solid rocket boosters. And Aerojet Rocketdyne restarted production of the RS-25 engines. Engines originally designed for the space shuttle, restarted under a new contract at a cost that has climbed steadily with each unit. The logic of cost plus made sense in the 1960s, when NASA was building things that had never existed. Nobody knew what a moon rocket would cost, because nobody had built one. The government absorbed the risk because the contractor couldn't price an unknown. But SLS was not unknown. It was specifically mandated to reuse shuttle-era technology, the same engines, the same solid rocket boosters, the same manufacturing facilities. The argument for cost plus was that heritage hardware would keep costs low. The result was the opposite. Here is the part that makes engineers uncomfortable. The cost growth on SLS is not a mystery. NASA's Office of Inspector General has documented it in detail. Boeing's core stage contract has been the primary source of delays and overruns, driven by what NASA officials themselves attributed to technical and managerial problems. The initial contract was an undefinitized action, meaning Boeing started work before the final terms and prices were agreed upon. That was in 2012. By 2019, the Inspector General found that Boeing had received higher fees than warranted given the delays. The incentive structure rewarded schedule adherence in theory, but in practice, the fees flowed regardless. The GAO has been asking NASA since 2014 to establish a cost baseline that tracks SLS production costs per mission. NASA partially agreed, then did not implement the recommendation. For over a decade, the actual cost per rocket has been effectively untracked by any official measure tied to performance. NASA uses rolling 5-year budget estimates that don't break costs down by mission or by recurring production item. The Inspector General called this a problem. The GAO called it a transparency failure. The rockets kept being funded. Now here is where the diagnosis gets structural. SLS was not designed by NASA alone. It was mandated by Congress. The NASA Authorization Act of 2010 directed the agency to build a heavy-lift vehicle using existing contracts, existing workforce, and existing infrastructure. Specifically, the facilities and suppliers already involved in the Space Shuttle and Constellation programs. The law specified propulsion type, payload targets, and an operational deadline of December 2016. The first flight happened in November 2022, 6 years late. The mandate was not subtle about its purpose. SLS components are built across multiple states, and the congressional delegations from those states have defended the program's funding with consistency that transcends party lines. When NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine suggested in 2019 that the agency might use Falcon Heavy instead of SLS for an early Artemis mission, Senator Richard Shelby, whose state, Alabama, hosts the Marshall Space Flight Center, where SLS is managed, reportedly told him to resign. Bridenstine retracted the suggestion. SLS continued. This is not corruption in the traditional sense. Nobody is stealing money. The contracts are legal, the procurement processes are documented, the work is real. What it is a system where the incentives of the contractors, the congressional delegations, and the agency's own institutional momentum all align toward the same outcome. Keep building, keep spending, keep the workforce employed. The rocket is a byproduct. HALE tried explaining this incentive loop at a dinner once. The host thought it was a conspiracy theory. It's the opposite. It's public record. Every dollar is accounted for. That's the point. The system works exactly as designed. The design just isn't optimized for cheap rockets. Compare this to how SpaceX built Falcon 9. NASA's Commercial Orbital Transportation Services program used a different contract model, fixed-price milestones. SpaceX was paid when it achieved specific technical objectives: engine test, first stage flight, orbital insertion. If costs overran, SpaceX absorbed them. If the company failed, it failed on its own money. The total NASA investment in Falcon 9 development was roughly $400 million. The rocket has since launched over 300 times, with a cost per launch that commercial customers pay around $67 million. The comparison is not entirely fair. Falcon 9 is a smaller rocket than SLS, with different capabilities. But the contract structure produced a fundamentally different incentive. Spend less, iterate faster, fly more. Starship extends this logic further. SpaceX is developing its next-generation vehicle largely with private capital, supplemented by specific NASA contracts like the Human Landing System Award. The company has stated a target launch cost of $10 million per flight, though current test flights cost closer to $100 million. Whether Starship reaches its cost targets is uncertain. What is not uncertain is the direction. Every design decision, stainless steel instead of carbon fiber, rapid iteration instead of lengthy review cycles, vertical integration instead of distributed subcontracting, points toward lower cost per kilogram to orbit. The rocket explodes sometimes. They build another one. The pattern is not unique to space. The F-35 Joint Strike Fighter program, the most expensive weapons program in history, was built under a similar procurement structure. Original cost estimate, $233 billion for development and acquisition. Current projection, over $2 trillion across the program's lifetime, with acquisition costs 84% above the original baseline. The GAO has found that the program, quote, after more than 2 decades, contractors received hundreds of millions in incentive fees, even as delivery timelines worsened. Aircraft were delivered an average of 238 days late in 2024, and contractors still earned portions of their on-time delivery bonuses. The fee structure allowed delivery up to 60 days late and still qualified for incentive payments. The mechanism is the same in both cases. Cost-plus contracts in environments where the buyer, the government, cannot easily walk away, where the political cost of cancellation exceeds the financial cost of continuation, and where the workforce is distributed across enough congressional districts to guarantee bipartisan support for funding. SLS components touch contractors in every U.S. state. The F-35 program involves suppliers in 46 states. The geographic distribution is not incidental, it is architecture. In late 2023, NASA's Inspector General estimated that a single SLS Block 1B rocket will cost at least $2.5 billion to produce, not including systems integration, and called NASA's goal of reducing that cost by 50% under a new contract. __quote _3__. The new contract, called EPOC, would transfer SLS production to a joint venture of Boeing and Northrop Grumman, called Deep Space Transport. The aspiration is to move towards something closer to a services model. But the OIG found that cost-saving initiatives in existing contracts had not achieved significant reductions. And the absence of competition makes it difficult for NASA to negotiate lower prices. The cost is likely to remain above $2 billion per vehicle through the first 10 launches. Meanwhile, in May 2025, the Trump administration proposed terminating SLS after Artemis III. Congress responded with the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which included $4.1 billion specifically for SLS rockets for Artemis 4 and 5, with mandated minimum spending of over $1 billion per year through 2029. The executive branch said, cancel it. The legislative branch said, fund it. Both cited the same rocket. The system continued. Senior NASA officials have told the GAO, on the record, that at current cost levels, the SLS program is unaffordable. That word, unaffordable, appeared in an official government audit of a program that continues to receive billions in appropriations. There is no contradiction here. Quote, _4__ describes the engineering economics. Quote, _5__ describes the political economics. They operate on different ledgers. The question this video started with was, why does one rocket cost $4 billion and another aims for $100 million? The answer is not technology. Both use liquid oxygen and hydrogen, or methane. Both lift heavy payloads. The answer is structure, contract structure, incentive structure, political structure. SLS is expensive because the system that produces it is optimized for employment continuity, contractor revenue, and congressional support. Starship is cheaper because the system that produces it is optimized for cost per kilogram. Neither system is irrational. They just solve different problems. And there's a question that connects this to something quieter. SLS costs $4 billion per launch. Behavioral health research for long-duration spaceflight, the kind we talked about last time, receives a fraction of that. The system that overfunds a Senate-mandated rocket and the system that underfunds crew psychology research may not be two systems. It may be one system, with one set of incentives, producing two very different outcomes depending on which line item has a congressional district attached to it. But there's a counterexample, a place where $75 million bought a lunar landing, where the budget wasn't a blank check, but a design constraint. That story is about India, and about what happens when the money runs out before the engineering does.